what's up everyone, your buddy Matt here. Welcome back to my workshop. Now in the previous video, part 1 of my snowblower tune-up masterclass, you were able to see everything that had to do with the engines. In this video, we're going to be doing everything that doesn't have to do with the engine, and we're going to test out these 3 wonderful beasts against each other in a feat of strength. You're going to love it. Stay tuned. All right, so augers, if you notice, these are all 2-stage snowblowers. They make single-stage snowblowers as well, where basically you'd only have this front section. It does spin a little bit quicker, but you would rely on that rotating motion to move the snow to the middle and then sort of lob it out the chute. Those would be characteristic of very old snowblowers, low-end snowblowers, or electric snowblowers. All 3 of these are 2-stage snowblowers, which are far superior. What's that, Gary? Yeah, I know yours is a 3-stage snowblower. Can someone get him more macadamia nuts or something? Like, I need to keep this guy quiet. We're working on these old things. 2 stages are as good as you'll get on these old guys here. Never mind 3 stages. We're not rich enough for those. Okay, so how does a 2-stage snowblower work? Basically, you have this front auger here that rotates in a way that moves the snow on either side towards the center. As that center snow stays there and the snowblower moves forward, it has nowhere to go but back there towards this rotating impeller. Ends up shooting it out hundreds of feet away from you, most probably more like 20. And that's basically it. Now, what can go wrong on these things? Okay, so one of the most common issues you'll have with your auger system is if something that's not supposed to be in here gets in there. Let's say a big piece of ice or a piece of wood or a cinder block or whatever that could be lying around your driveway gets wedged up in here, preventing it from turning. Now, you don't want to damage any component in here irreparably. So the design engineers that put these snowblowers together were very cunning. They installed something known as a shear bolt or a shear pin. When you look at how a snowblower works, your engine turns, there's a pulley right over here, we'll see that in a couple seconds, that goes down and drives a bigger pulley down there. That pulley drives your second stage and this shaft. So this shaft here is spinning, goes into this gearbox that's like a T, and has 2 other spinning shafts, one on each side, that are held on by bearings. Now, this is not the spinning shaft. This is a hollow shaft that's connected to the center shaft through this bolt. If you look at this guy over here, you can see that I'm connected to that center shaft. Look at this guy now. I removed the shear bolt, and now you can see that it's no longer connected to that center shaft. You would require the bolt to be reinstalled in order to re-engage it. So if ever you're snow blowing and suddenly you notice a buildup of snow, maybe more on one side, you go to the front and you can see that one half of your auger is not spinning, you know that you most probably broke your shear bolt. You could go ahead and clear the debris, reinstall a brand new bolt. It will be broken. That's the only piece that will break, and you'll be good to go in no time. Basically, the only other thing you have to do is a visual inspection of it. As you can see, we have some debris that's left over from last season. This guy here appears to have swallowed up some kind of wire. We're going to have to remove that. Anything that gets wrapped up in there can cause this thing to jam and maybe break one of your shear bolts. The second stage, however, doesn't have a mechanism to protect it. You'll notice that your belt will slip if ever that guy gets really jammed up. Another thing you want to take a look at is if anything is bent or damaged. Like you can see this guy over here is a pretty nasty little bend in it. I'm probably going to take a hammer and try to bang that back a little bit straighter. You can also make sure that there's no interference. You can see that maybe this thing would have scraped at some point in the back. We just want to make sure that nothing is damaged. Maybe a bearing or something would be so loose that it would go ahead and scrape it. There could also be dents on here that would make it that there would be an interference. Same thing inside. If you see one of those impeller paddles scraping, you can go ahead and try to straighten those out. One funny little note is, although this newer snowblower is built pretty much cheaper in every way, shape, or form compared to the older ones, they did get one thing right. You can look at this gearbox over here. You can actually check the level of fluid in the gearbox, and these bearings are greasable. Two features that these two guys over here do not have. Very nice Noma Snowblower. So that being said, I mean, anything that's greasable should get greased. But like I said, most of the time they're not all that greasable. But we can go ahead and give this one a little bit of grease. It'll enjoy that. If you look down the chute of this magnificent Noma, you'll notice that I performed a little modification. I ended up putting these rubber scrapers. I drilled holes and I put these rubber scrapers. This was a jig I made. I did this in 2015 in order to get a little bit more clearance. That really helps if you're going through slush or wet snow. Normally on a snowblower, you have quite a bit of clearance between the impeller and the casing wall. And what that allows is that when the snow's particularly wet, it doesn't have enough scraping power in order to get it out, and it ends up clogging your machine. This guy is now impervious to that. So we're getting closer and closer to the end of this little tune-up video. The last thing I want to do is take a look at the straps. The covers are usually held on by 1 or 2 bolts on either side at the bottom. So we'll go ahead and quickly remove these covers and take a look at the straps. So if you notice, they're all pretty much running on the same principle. You have a dual pulley over here on the motor. 2 straps go down. 1 strap is in charge of traction, and 1 strap is in charge of the auger and all the snow removal process. Whether you have something like this Toro that you just put into gear and engage the auger without any sort of safety mechanisms, basically this thing could just start moving forward, blowing snow without anyone behind it. Or you have a safer model that you have to keep your hands on the handle at all times in order to activate the controls. They all basically function on the same principle. The front pulley ends up handling the auger section, and that's the one that engages and disengages when you engage the auger handle. This one also has a brake, I guess, for added safety. When you disengage, it ends up stopping the auger immediately. Like I mentioned before, if ever you were to get something wedged in your second stage, basically your belt would be the one slipping. You would hear screeching, and you would notice that you'd have no more snow coming out of it. You could then turn off the machine, very important, remove the obstruction, and then check and make sure your belt is okay. If ever you notice that it's screeching and there's no obstruction, you might have a finished or untightened belt. We'll take a look in a couple seconds on how to tighten that. The second pulley is the one that handles the traction. Now, there are different ways that the clutch system works on these things. This guy here, when you activate the handle, the large pulley at the bottom ends up moving backwards, engaging itself into the mechanism. When you move the handle on the Tecumseh over here, you notice that nothing's happening. In fact, the movement is happening in here. Usually there's like a traction disc. It's basically like a bit of a tire that rides up against a large plate. You can see here the friction disc I was talking about. This is basically just a flat disc, and this is that little tire, the friction wheel. Right now we're sort of in neutral because we're not engaged, but when I engage the handle, we can see that friction disc moving forward, engaging with the traction wheel. Moreover, you can see that as I change gears, that traction wheel ends up moving back and forth, allowing it to grab at a larger diameter or a smaller diameter of that wheel, basically changing the speed of the tires. When we move over to the other side of the wheel, we end up hitting reverse. And that's what gives you your traction. If ever they're slipping and you know it's not your belt, sometimes that traction wheel needs replacing. But that's beyond the scope of this video. So what do you look for when you're inspecting the pulley system? You want to make sure that your belts are in good condition. A, they have to be complete. That is, you can't have a broken belt. B, you have to make sure that they're not too damaged. Like if you notice that rear belt in there is starting to get damaged. Now, although it's not critical, it's not missing chunks, you know that this thing's going to fail pretty soon. So now's the best time to read what's on it and make sure you get a replacement belt. If ever you can't read what's on it because it got worn off, hopefully you still have a belt that fits and you can measure, or you take it with you to, say, your auto parts store, wherever you get your parts, and go ahead and ask them to measure it for you. Sometimes you have to buy 1 or 2 different sizes because you don't know which one is perfect. Worst comes to worst, you bring the other one back. So the way you check your tension on, say, the auger section is you have to make sure that your auger is engaged. When it's not engaged, you want it to be very loose because you actually want this to spin and not engage the belt. With the auger now engaged, you want to make sure that you have about 1/2 inch to 1 inch of play in your belt when you press on it. You want to also make sure that if you pull on it, you're spinning the pulley, not just slipping on it. If you want to go ahead and adjust it, you can notice that there's an adjustment nut over here. You loosen it up and you can push it in order to get a little bit more tension on that belt. Other types of machines, like this one over here, require you to adjust the linkage in order to get more or less travel from the handle and ultimately this pulley lever. You would then adjust this guy here in order for this to go a little further in. On this deluxe snowblower over here, this spring ultimately acts as an automatic tensioner, always keeping the proper tension on the system. You basically pull the spring up and it'll automatically add the specific amount of tension onto your belt. Very nice. The final thing you can check for is how well your things spin, loose parts and whatnot. I've noticed over here that this brake mechanism is actually pretty loose. We're gonna have to go ahead and tighten that back up. You just kind of go over the entire thing and make sure that there's nothing out of the ordinary, bearings, stuff like that that could be finished. Word of advice, now's the time, if there are markings on your belt, to take note of them, because when your belt ends up breaking, sometimes it wears out so bad that you won't be able to read those markings anymore. And what I like to do is go out and buy a spare of each and have it, because on a Sunday morning when you got 3 feet of snow and you're just out there doing your job, getting all that snow to your driveway, you don't want to have to stop midway to go down to the auto parts store that may or may not be open and buy a new belt. They're under $10, just keep a couple in stock. Okay, so I feel quite confident that these blowers are tuned up well enough to start their tests. I filled them up with some gas. Let's try starting them up. So pardon the wind, but here we are at the game yard. This is where the feat of strength is gonna occur. The first challenge, basically this point right here where the marker is exactly 12 feet away from this 6 foot tall fence. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna hit this as a center line. The center of the snowblower will hit this line, and we wanna see if it can lob snow over a 6 foot fence from a 12 foot center line. Let the record state 12 inches of snow. Let the games begin. All right, so all three of these beasts performed magnificently in the first feat. Well, I mean, these two did. This one, so-so. I decided to give these guys like a power factor. Basically what I did was I took the square footage of the auger, basically the width times the height of the maximum amount of snow that could go into the auger. That gave me a square footage. So if I look at it, the Toro, 3.8 square feet of snow that can enter from the front. The Snowflite, we got 4.6 square feet. And the Noma 3.6, the smallest of them all. And then as you can imagine, I guess the bigger the motor with the smaller the opening, the more power you should have. So an 8 horsepower, if you divide 8 horsepower by 3.8, you end up getting 2.1 horsepower per square foot. The Snowflite comes in at 2.4, so a little bit better. The winner, surprisingly, is this Noma. It's got a 10 horsepower motor and the smallest opening, giving it a 2.8 horsepower per square foot. The advantage, but as we've just seen, it had a hard time lobbing that snow. I had to adjust the chute, which is okay, but I even had to slow it down. So a little bit disappointing, but as we know, this one's the one that's kind of in the worst shape. So anyhow, let's move on to test number 2. Okay, so what do I have in store for you for test number 2? If you notice, there's a marker right over here, and the distance from there to right up to here is exactly 15 feet. That's right, folks, 15 linear feet. Right about here, we have about a foot of snow. It gets a little bit higher as we go, but pretty much equally all over. We're going to take 3 nice passes, 1 pass per each snowblower. Doesn't really matter where it throws the snow or how far it throws it. All we want to see is how much time it takes to get from here to there, comparatively. Let the games continue. Here we have the remnants of the race. I definitely have to mention that the Toro and the Noma, the finish of the pass is so-so, but that Snowflite gives you such a nice clean pass. I mean, you don't see it very well now because we passed over it in our last pass, but man, that Snowflite is a real Cadillac. Let's go check the results of that race. Okay, so as you can see, these two guys basically did it in pretty much the same amount of time, about 20 seconds each. However, because this guy takes a bigger bite, it actually removes more snow per minute or per second or per hour, however you want to see it. So this guy is the clear winner, second place, but second place with a real honorable mention. I mean, did you see the way this guy lobbed the snow over that fence? This guy really did the best. Maybe it has to do with this weird auger design that no one uses anymore. Maybe it's the palette mod. However, honorable mention, second place. Good job, Toro. You're still my favorite. And surprisingly, even with the highest power factor, this old guy comes in last place. I can't say I'm surprised. All right, guys, I hope you found this video a little bit informative and a lot entertaining. Don't hesitate to like and subscribe if you enjoy what I'm doing, and I'll catch you in the next one. Signing out.